What makes an album a truly unsettling or disturbing piece of art? Furthermore, what makes an unsettling or disturbing album somehow wonderfully blissful at the same exact time? Today, I want to discuss an album you have probably never heard of, Towers. Towers, to be blunt, is a dark ambient or drone album found within the depths of the internet, and I'll also be breaking down what makes the dark ambient genre later on in the video as well, so make sure you stick around for the entire thing. Towers, however, is quite special, and I recommend you buckle up right now because you and I are going to be scavenging this brilliantly disturbing and atmospherically vast album. Let us see what we can uncover from its shrouding narrative. I want to dive into the music found on the album, the story and the creation of the album with words from the producers themselves, as well as the visual interpretations an album like this creates for myself and others who have happened to stumble upon it. The album presents an incredibly vivid world in your mind while listening to it, a world so three-dimensional that you swear you've been there before. And maybe there's good reason you haven't returned to that world since. I want you to hold my hand and do not look up at the windows or who may be falling out of them, and maybe, just maybe, you and I can be at peace within the disturbing world of Towers. Before we dive into the video, I just want to give you a heads up that this video can also be read in article form over on Vapor 95. Head on over there and check out the other articles I've written on the site, as well as some cool Vaporwave related merch they got cooking over there. We'll leave the link in the description below. Towers was originally created by two producers who go by Pav and Anylobe, under the aliases Corporate Disaster, a now defunct drone side project concept. The project was eventually left on the back burner for personal reasons and eventually fizzled out, but fast forward 2 to 3 years later, where one of the members of the duo, Anylobe, took it upon himself to submit the album to the Geometric Lullaby label, where it currently rests waiting for you to visit. Released on the label on April 16th, 2019, the duo, now referring to themselves also by the name Towers, resides next to some fellow exceptional releases: The Death's Dynamic Shroud Physicals, Spirit Realm, and The Form of Life is Dead, just to name a few. The album is constructed in a simple manner. 4 songs titled Towers 1, Towers 2, Towers 3, and Towers 4. The contribution from Pav's end was mostly sampled bass and produced through Adobe Audition, while the work on Anylobe's end was almost completely original, ultimately creating a unique blend of the two techniques for the final result. Most of the sounds and textures I did consciously, and deliberately made them to feel like a 3D effect. Pav had sent me a bunch of ambient type tracks, and I added most of the textures and sounds that kind of spliced and glued it all together. If I can produce the sound I'm looking for, I try not to sample. With each song varying in duration between 12 and 17 minutes, the album ends up being just below an hour of a listen, a worthwhile length for an album falling under the dark ambient genre. Towers hits that sweet spot where it's not too long, where it feels overly stretched and tiresome, but just long enough where you can really fall into this trance-like state within the deepest clutches of the album. So let us talk about what dark ambient is before we get into discussing what makes this masterclass album so dark, brooding, and beautifully haunting. Referred to as ambient industrial in the late 1980s, dark ambient is a genre of post-industrial music home to a blend of elements whose purpose is to create this distant or vast feeling in an atmosphere influenced by gloom and doom. Ominous, dark droning, and catacombal sounds make up the life of this genre, and while most times we find the genre to feature electronically generated instruments, dark ambient can also include the sampling of hand-played instruments or other semi-acoustic recording procedures, making the creative toolbox for the style never empty. Found sounds, bellowing frequencies, warped field recordings, overextended gongs and cymbals, eerie harmonies, and distorted voices are just some of the many paths that can make up your go-to dark ambient track. Towers definitely has traces of what your go-to dark ambient album can contain, however it tends to be peppered with a more streamlined cyberpunk flair that we see a lot these days from music producers lurking in the catacombs of the internet. During the process of creating Towers, I initially wanted to simply create music that was essentially a soundtrack to cityscapes in general. I've always had a fascination, or perhaps even a fetish, of late-night cityscapes. It was a strange, atmospheric aura that the aesthetic had that nearly called out to me. It is sometimes indescribable. So the album starts off with a group of hollering emergency sirens, sounds that immediately spark up the initial memories of listening to releases like the legendary Birth of a New Day, or any other 2814 projects for that matter. However, instead of continually dropping tangible sounds like blurry police sirens in the distance, car tires rubbing against the late night asphalt, or the clacking of one's shoes on the concrete after leaving a late night at the office, like a lot of other cyberpunk dark ambient albums do, this album, Towers, becomes way more subjective right off the bat. It doesn't become this literal infrastructure smoothie. That's a new one, infrastructure smoothie. It doesn't become this literal infrastructure smoothie you may hear on a lot of those other cyberpunk-inspired releases. It is here, right here, mere seconds into the album, where Towers begins to let you interpret the sounds in your own way. There is this beautiful opportunity for your subconscious to begin piecing together this mental image of what the sounds coming out of the album would or could look like if they were brought to life right in front of you. Where other cyberpunk-inspired dark ambient albums would just drag and drop city sound effects into the mix on top of the instrumentals, Towers uses a variety of filters to distort those common noises to create a world much more paranormal or sci-fi. I personally had a sort of open-ended narrative in mind that the listener could sort of fill in the blanks with their own imagination. The sirens at the introduction of the album quickly begin to fade to a halt, implying that this obvious sound of a sign of danger is only a temporary beginning to the story here. What follows next in the album is a series of drawn-out, beautifully enchanted synths that slowly begin to creep up on you. To me, the warbled and gradual tone of these rising synths present the idea of what it could possibly feel like if you were fading from your very own body upon your death and now escalating into an uncharted, spiritual state neglected of feeling you once were so accustomed to in the physical world. I can't help but take the role of the falling man in the album artwork here, as if we hit the pavement and are slowly beginning to evaporate from the pain and noises around us, transitioning into a more angelic state. Eventually, the synths go back and forth between haunting and somber, and the smudgy rainfall triggers this vision of leaving the never-ending world of skyscrapers as you rise higher and higher into the bluish purple night sky, leaving all the sounds below. Before we continue on to one of the more interesting connections I have made with this album, I wanted to share this little stat. As of right now, 15.6% of my subscribers have turned on all notifications for the Pad Chennington channel. Are you one of them? Whether it is your first time here or you've been chilling with me for a while, just wanted to give you a friendly reminder to make sure you are not only subscribed, but that you have clicked the bell and turned all notifications on so you never miss the moment I drop a new video. Doing this helps the channel out so much, and I cannot thank you enough for doing so. So, one of the first things this album reminded me of, immediately, right off the bat, upon discovering it for the first time, is the infamous picture of the falling man, a photo taken by Richard Drew on September 11th, 2001, of a man falling from the then burning North Tower of the Twin Towers. The album's nighttime setting developed a different moment in time for me in my head, a timeline where the tragic events of the day took place at night instead of early in the day. The narrative was meant to serve as a part of the lore I had created for the corporate disaster Elias, but after much analysis as of recently, I decided that it's going to be its own universe. I plan to write a story for the expansion of that project's universe, but I'm keeping the details of it on the down low. Ironically enough, that's the man from Myst, but there wasn't much of a meaning to it other than to set the mood of the listener in a subtle way, but it's open to interpretation. At 10 minutes and 26 seconds into the first track of the album, the sound of a man screaming and, without a doubt, falling at the same time can be heard, triggered by the effects laid on the tail end of the scream sound effect. Towers has a really cool way with how they blend obvious sounds to give those sounds movement, where if they didn't put any effects on it, it would just kind of be sitting still, but you can feel that sound effect move from one spot to another. Here specifically with the screaming man falling. Another instance of this happening on the album is when they electronically distort the sound of trickling water from time to time, perplexing the sounds of water to scrape through the hundreds of concrete surfaces or pipes laid throughout the city. This makes the common practice we see time and time again of producers using background water sound effects, for example, evolve into something much more mysterious or otherworldly, giving the texture of the rain a more sludge feel than smooth or liquidy. The album also strikes a resounding resemblance to the HKE classic HK. While HK is more sporadic in its nature compared to the subtle tones of Towers, the opening track on HK straight up sounds like it's possessed. Both albums portray this paranormal city syndrome that I could just never resist. I love that vibe. While both albums also feature a striking resemblance in color palette and setting, I was surprised to find that the HKE Classic release played no influence while making the album. We are both very aware of HKE and are longtime fans of his early works, but the album HK was never thought of during the creation of Towers. Yeah, I love HKE's music, but I've never heard of that album yet. I will definitely check it out. So alive and lurking at every corner, the unsettling bliss in Towers resides in its colorful and contrasting nature, a journey from immediate chaos to angelic blur that you can interpret in your own way. I can't recommend this album enough, so you too can have your own unique experience in this world where inescapable darkness and endless buildings are all we had ever known. Do you know of any other interesting, weird, eerie, yet enchanting albums out there on the internet? Let me and everyone else know in the comments below. And until next time, much love, your boy, Chennington.